Okay, well, let me just run through the verses. The question was, how is it that Roman centurion, who Jesus, I haven't seen faith like this anywhere else in Israel, how is it he came to understand who Jesus was so he could have that kind of faith so early in Jesus' ministry? Because this happens so early in Matthew 8, so not much has transpired at that point. So I said, read these verses. So Romans 10:17, faith comes from hearing, because remember, that's how you actually build your knowledge of who God is. That's the pillars that your faith bridge is built on. Faith comes by hearing, hearing through the word of Christ. And then Matthew 7:29, it's the last sentence in the Sermon on the Mount. And the last sentence says, for he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes. And then Matthew 8:9, the centurion himself says, for I too am a man under authority. So how did he come to understand who Jesus was enough to build that kind of faith? He heard this Sermon on the Mount. That's the best explanation I've ever thought of. It's what immediately precedes this entire event is the Sermon on the Mount. And the general commentary on the Sermon on the Mount was, at that last sentence, is that you could sense Jesus' authority in the way that he taught on the Sermon on the Mount. And I believe, now this is just Jim's explanation, but I believe that his exposure to hearing the Sermon on the Mount changed his life, and he heard authority. So when he came to him to ask for Jesus to heal his servant, he says, well, you're a man of authority. I just heard it. Is that the same conclusion you came to, or different conclusions? Same one? Yeah. So if you take a passage and you read a broader radius, that'll help you. He was there to sort of keep the peace. That was his job, to keep the peace. And when that many people assemble on a hillside, you better go keep the peace. And then he heard. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's my simple explanation. I hope that's how you got to as well. But when you're reading these narratives, and what's going to happen today and next week a lot, you have to put on your thinking cap and think through what's going on in the narrative, because there's actually more going on than you can see or they've documented. But there's typical human responses, and if you just read wide enough, a lot of these things will click. He understood Jesus' authority. And Matthew, when he wrote the end of the Sermon on the Mount, said they heard this authority. That sort of makes sense to me. So anyway, okay, there's that. So more thinking cap stuff today as we look at this guy as well as that guy and someone today and someone next week. These three of faith, especially in the New Testament. Again, what I prefaced last time, I'll do again this time. We always expect people who are characterized as people of faith to be evidenced by doing something really big and miraculous. And yet in the New Testament, people of faith didn't do anything miraculous. However, Jesus points out to us great faith, so we understand what faith is all about. So we're going to do that again today. And this is my mountain again outside my house. This is a shot I took sipping coffee as I stepped out just the other day. So these mountains we expect to be indicators, gigantic, overwhelming, divine dimension things that show people's faith. And that can happen. But by and large, you see something different in the routine of life. And that's what we're seeing with these guys we're looking at right now. Okay, so here we go. We're in Matthew 15, one of my favorite chapters of Matthew. We're going to verse 21. Okay, so Jesus went away from there, Gennesaret, on the Sea of Galilee. He went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon, which are called that today. So, drum roll, here's your 2-minute geography lesson again. So, we're hovering over the Sinai Desert right now. The yellow thing is present-day Israel. That's the present-day borders. North of there on the coast is Lebanon, present-day Lebanon, where Beirut is. And so, we're actually in Gennesaret, which I told you is on the Sea of Galilee. So, we've got to come down a little bit and come down. And as we descend over this great Sinai Peninsula, the Nile Delta is over there on the left going off the screen. The Dead Sea's in the middle here, and the Jordan River Valley that flows down from the Sea of Galilee in the north. So as we come down here, that's pretty much the boundaries of Israel to this day. Everything to the right of the screen that's brown is Jordan, present-day Jordan. This bright white spot that's right here, that's Amman, Jordan. And there's Jerusalem, so you can get oriented again. So we're going to end up going north. Yeah, Cyprus is up at the top of the screen in the Mediterranean. So we'll go up closer to Galilee up there. Damascus, Syria is everything to the right over here. Damascus itself is to the right. That's Syria. This yellow pooch around to the right from the Dead Sea, that was actually won during the Six-Day War in 1967. Okay, so now we're coming down on Sea of Galilee, and I said we're at Gennesaret. Do you remember your clock face? Tiberias, Magdala, Gennesaret. So Gennesaret's at about 10 o'clock. Capernaum is at 11 o'clock. Bethsaida is at the top at midnight. Okay, so this is where they're going to go. So they're starting in Gennesaret, which is at 10 o'clock on this clock dial. There it is. And they're going to take this white path over to Tyre and Sidon, which is actually somewhere between a 3 and 4 day walk. So they're going to go all the way to the coast, straight over to the coast from there, come up the present-day Lebanese coast, and that little pointy thing right there, that's Tyre, and then Sidon, if you follow along the coast, the coast further to the north, you get to Sidon. So where Jesus is taking the apostles now is to the very upper limits to the north of anything we have documented of where he goes in the Gospels. I mean, this is way out there. Way out there. And it's so much way out there that this area right here is still considered Canaanite. That is, it's populated by people who were there before Joshua came in and pushed people out. These are the remnant of those people. And not only Canaanite in general, but more specifically Phoenician. So the Phoenicians were the ones who anciently made their living not by growing crops, but by trading on the Mediterranean. They were the boat people. So they would trade all over the Mediterranean. This coast right here, all the way down to present-day Gaza, was considered Phoenician in many respects because that was the coast where they came and went. So Jesus is leaving Galilee and he's walking somewhere, it says, in the region of Tyre and Sidon, which means somewhere like right here, somewhere on that coast. We don't know exactly where. And it's easily a 3-day walk to Tyre. Maybe another day walk to Sidon. So they're going way out of their way. Now, Jesus does all this ministry in Galilee. You can see it right there as we're looking toward the southeast. There's Galilee and the Dead Sea, and Jerusalem's way up here. So that's where Jesus spends most of his time, is Galilee and Jerusalem. This is just way off the beaten path. So you got to figure something important is going to happen here. And it doesn't look at it at first, but it really is. It's tremendously important. Okay, so that's where we are. Feeling smarter now? Yeah. Okay. 21. Jesus went away from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. Both this and the Mark passage says Jesus went there to retire from the peoples. He wasn't looking for crowds. He was looking to get away from the crowds. So he walks 3 days to get away from the crowds. And this is where he goes. Okay. And behold, a Canaanite woman, there you go, Canaanite woman from that region came out and was crying, "Have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely oppressed by a demon." Okay, this is not unlike what has normally happened in his travels. However, how did she know that Jesus could heal people? And is she a believer in who Jesus is? And she's a Canaanite woman. She's not an Israelite, so she's definitely an outsider. So that's the big mystery right here as well. How does she know to appeal to Jesus? And Jesus responds to her, drum roll. Nothing. He did not answer her a word. Well, now wait a second. That's odd. That's almost rude, in fact. That seems so odd. She is appealing to him to help her daughter who has this demon possession thing going on. And she's appealing to him, and he's just saying, talk to the hand. It's like no response at all. Now, I'm sure everybody is astonished. She's astonished. The apostles are astonished. All the crowds that might be around him are astonished. Why is Jesus just ignoring this woman? And ignoring the woman goes on for a while because the disciples came and begged him, saying, "Send her away, for she's crying out after us." Evidently, she's becoming something of a disruptive pest. And she just keeps claiming out, "Have mercy on me, O Son of David! Have mercy on me, O Son of David! Oh, have mercy on me, O Son of David!" When I do it with youth groups, I get hoarse when I do that too much. But she evidently is getting under the skin of the apostles. So what do they expect Jesus to do? Now look carefully. What do they say to Jesus? Send her away. Now, does that mean send her away with or without healing?
Just send her away.
Just send her away.
See, we don't know. This is why this is fun to speculate. It would be in character of Jesus at this point in the ministry to just heal her to get her away. So he could just say to her, okay, your daughter's fixed. Get out of here. Go home. You'll find out. Right? And she would be so excited about finding out how their daughter is. She would leave. And the apostles would go, thank you, Jesus. Whoa. Or he could have just sent her away. Now, I think both options are on the table. We really don't know what they're thinking. All the apostles are concerned about is not her healing. It's that she get out of there. That's a bad attitude on their part. Or although they might be thinking, well, she's being so disruptive up here, she's messing up the whole reason we're here, which we don't know what that is, but she's being so disruptive, she's kind of dominating the circumstance. Jesus, you need to kind of just get her out of here. You need to send her away. If that means healing your daughter and sending her away, if that just means sending her away, do something, because this is intolerable for them. They can't take this anymore. So send her away. So she is becoming something of a pest, at least in their eyes. Now, you'll see in a second that Jesus is not bothered by her being there and demanding. In fact, what it reminds me of is Jesus talking about the fact, when he talks about prayer, he says, think of people who appeal to a judge, and they do it over and over and over, and in their repetition, they finally get some attention. People do that when they cry to God, cry to God, cry to God. There's nothing wrong with that repetition. Persist, and at least even in a human, secular sense, people will respond to you. Even a human judge will. So God will hear you. He'll respond to you. So there's this kind of repetition thing perhaps that's going on here. Okay. So 24, he finally does answer. Healing or no healing? I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Wow. This does seem very rude. I mean, it's... What? And again, I think there's astonishment in the crowd. I think she's like, and the apostles going, yeah. Or I really don't know. It's like, this is astonishing. This has never happened before in Jesus' ministry with someone who's asked for healing. It seems like every single time someone comes and he heals them. But this time he's saying, I'm really, my purpose, I was sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So, in a sense, he's shrugging his shoulders and saying, I think my hands are tied. But he's not really. He's tickling a deeper issue here. Well, oh boy. She came and she knelt before him, saying the perfect words, Lord, help me. Now, how can you resist that, right? Well, he's already said that his job is with Israel. That's what he's talking about with the lost sheep of the house of Israel. The house of Israel that haven't really understood who the Messiah is in himself. That's the one he's sent to. But she says, still, I'm a Canaanite woman. Lord, just help me. So she doesn't argue with him. She doesn't come up with her best apologetics about anything. She really is very submissive. She's extraordinarily submissive. And instead of going away, she kneels before him and just says the three best words in the world, just, Lord, help me. Now, I'll stop right here and say I love those three words because many times when we're in hot water, we don't use those three words. The words we use is usually, well, God, you see, I got this situation. And I can handle A, B, and C, but I can't handle D. So then you say, so God, help me to do this by you doing that. So what we do is we usually cut them a contract saying, there's a lot of things I can handle here, but this last thing puts me over the top. So will you help me to do this? Instead of just saying, help me. That's the best prayer. And many times I also rationalize when I pray to God. And I say, God, I thought I was on top of this. I thought this was going okay. And I spell out the entire situation to him, and I tell him why it is I'm in over my head. And it's like God doesn't need to hear that. What he wants to know is your heart really submitted to him and say, God, just help me. So whenever you're at a loss for words in a prayer situation where you have a great need, I suggest these three. Not bad at all. Okay, so that's what she says. Lord, help me. So will he relent on this thing about the lost sheep of Israel? So he answered, save or no save. It's not right to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Well, the lost sheep of Israel, the Israelites, those are the ones Jesus is sent to. That's his primary focus, right? That's what he's saying. I was sent to them. And they are the ones whose children are sitting at the table with bread. You don't take the bread that's meant for the lost sheep of Israel, the children of Israel, and give it to dogs like you. Which, by the way, that was the catchphrase for Gentiles and especially Canaanites. They were called dogs. So he's saying this is reminiscent of you don't cast your pearl before swine, that kind of thing. So Jesus is still standing his ground. He's saying, I'm sent to Israel. I'm sent to the lost sheep in Israel. And by the way, it's not right to take what's meant for them and give it to the dogs. Talking about you. Now, Jesus isn't being rude. He's making a profound point. Now, we just hope that this woman isn't caught in the conflict of making this point. So he says that. And then she says, this is where the music swells in the movie. Yes, Lord. That's a good start. But it's just a start. Yes, Lord. But even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table. And it melts my soul when she says that. Hey, look what she understands about Jesus, about the Messiah. And look how undeserving she is. And yet look how much she understands the breadth of the grace of God. I'm not deserving. I don't have Abraham's blood. I'm out here in the middle of Tyre and Sidon. I'm a nobody in nobody land. In fact, I'm a classic enemy of Israel. In fact, the only other time we have that Jesus mentions Tyre and Sidon is earlier in the gospel. He talks about all the miracles that he'd done in the north end of the Sea of Galilee, at Chorazin, which is up the hillside from Capernaum, and over in Bethsaida, which is at midnight on there, the fishing village. And he says basically, look, if the people in Tyre and Sidon had seen the miracles that you guys are seeing here in Chorazin and in Bethsaida, then in a sense, in Jim's vernacular, I'm going to have to apologize to the judgment that's coming to Tyre and Sidon. If they had seen what you had seen, they would be much better off. And he says, in fact, during the day of judgment, I fear for you guys, Chorazin and Bethsaida, because you saw things that they never saw. So Tyre and Sidon was kind of a catchword for where the judgment of God was going to go. And in the Old Testament, that's also very clear as well. So Tyre and Sidon it's outcast area. So she understands she's not standing on any kind of privileged ground. I'm a Canaanite woman. My daughter has this demon oppression problem. I've fallen at your knees and said, Lord, help me. And then you came back and told me, but look, throwing food to the children, to the dogs, but yet even the crumbs that fall down, it's okay for the dogs to eat. And Jesus' response, and he answered her and said, oh, woman, great is your faith. Whoa. And the word is megas. You know what that word is, right? Mega. Megas. You have megas faith. Megas pistis. That's what you have. You have mega faith. Now look, she didn't move any mountains. In fact, at this point, she's still kneeling in front of Jesus. She's thrown herself down. What indicates that she has faith? That's the big question. And we've been working on this. I've been saving this because this one's a little hard to determine. How can you tell she has faith? What is it that Jesus sees that he says, now there's faith? What is it he sees in her? Yeah. So really, her entire actions and her words say something about what she knows about Jesus, which at this time is just starting to gel in people's minds in the New Testament. But most of them have not been inclusive of the Gentiles in what they're understanding about who Jesus is. In fact, when you get into Acts, that's a very big conflict in Acts. It goes to where they actually have to have like a worldwide conference and get together and discuss the Gentile problem. And the Gentile problem is, are they in or are they out? So even after Jesus has died and he's resurrected, the whole Gentile issue is just not on the map. But here, she seems to understand that the Gentiles are on the map. That's an astonishing understanding. And so when we go back to our idea of that faith bridge and the pillars of it that support it being the truth about who God is, somehow she knows that in one of those truths about who God is, God doesn't just love the Israelites, he loves the whole world. And he's willing to intercede for the whole world, not just for Israel. How did she know that? And in fact, I don't have a good answer for that. But that's clearly what Jesus is saying. when he does that. And we go back to actions, because next week it's going to be crucial that you look at actions and not words. Actions will always evidence what you believe. And so her belief said that Jesus can save, even though he's the Jewish Messiah and I'm a Canaanite. I will come, I'll go to him, I'll continue to cry out to him until he responds to me, right? And then I'll fall down at his feet and say, Lord, help me. Those are all actions that are based on her understanding who Jesus is. That's how you see faith. That's when you see your trust, when you come to a crisis and you estimate the crisis, you realize the threat is bigger than my ability to deal with it. That's when you know you're in trouble, right? So at that point when you come to God, you say, God, I'm going to stop trusting in me because it's clear I can't. I'm going to take my trust off me and put my trust in you. So whatever you can do. So that action, that's really faith. So faith, when we looked in the bridge, is not only built on the truth of who God is, and then we start to walk across it, that's the action of it, but in the full respect of walking across that bridge, even though you don't know in specific where it's going, you do know that at the end of that bridge is God's kindness and loving kindness toward you. You can be confident of that, but who knows what it's going to be like on the other end. Okay, so there's a lot of this stuff. Great is your faith. I was going to say, too, I think about the apostles a lot when I think through these scenes. At the beginning of this scene, they're basically telling Jesus, this woman is a pest. You need to get her out of our midst. And then seconds later, Jesus says, now that's Megas faith right there, boys, right there. And they're going, what? It's a great slap in their face. It really is. But it is really great faith. He's not just messing around. He really is. So be it done for you as you desire, and her daughter was healed instantly. Yeah, okay. So it was this interaction where Jesus seems to be rude in not paying attention to her, following and explaining that to the apostles and her by saying, well, look, I'm not really sent to her. And then he doubles down on that when she appeals again. He says, I'm not really sent to you. You don't give the food to the children and to the dogs. And she comes back with a massive understanding of the breadth of the grace of God. And that drives her to ask him to help her, and he does. And everyone's blown away. She clearly had an understanding. Her actions followed and demonstrate she had an understanding. So there is so much about the nature of faith that's based on what you know about God and whether or not you're willing to trust in that. That's really what faith is all about. It's the evidence of things unseen. So God is unseen. Faith in the New Testament, like I said, faith is always in an object. The object is God himself. It's in Jesus, right? And who he is, his identity slowly unfolded. But the question really, like I say, is that's the issue here, is who Jesus is it relevant to Gentiles? Or is it only relative to the Jews? Because after all, this is the Jewish Messiah. So what about the Gentiles? So Jesus is making a gigantic statement here in Tyre and Sidon about the Gentiles and about the fact that no one understood that also he was bringing grace to the Gentiles, and this woman skunked everyone else in the crowd knowing it. And that makes her faith great. See, that's what's astonishing about that. Okay, look, we're at the wrap-up time. Oh, well, that was fast. Well, it's a short passage. Just some final thoughts. I wanted to point this out before we just move on because these are important. She calls him Messiah. She says, Son of David, Son of David. And every time you saw Son of David cried out, the lepers did this as well. They cried out, Son of David. They were saying something important about his messiahship is when they were doing that. So that really is the fundamental basis of their belief towers, is Jesus is the promised Messiah. Now, the fact that she, as a Canaanite woman, would admit that and embrace that is astonishing. So from her faith model, that builds the supports of the bridge she's on. Just understanding that Jesus is the Messiah. And so she calls out to him, Son of David, Son of David. Here's another place you can kind of see it. In Matthew 12:22, a demon-oppressed man who was blind and mute was brought to him, and he healed him so that the man spoke and saw. And all the people were amazed and said, can this be the Son of David? This is just a couple chapters earlier. He healed this guy. And now look at the Pharisees' response. Faith here? Did the Pharisees have faith? But when the Pharisees heard it, they said, oh, it's only by Beelzebub, the prince of demons, that this man casts out the demons. Two fundamentally different ideas of who this Jesus is to try and explain the miracle that just happened in front of their eyes. So seeing miracles like this doesn't necessarily guarantee people will come to understand and embrace the identity of Jesus, because the Pharisees didn't. Their alternative explanation was, it's the devil. The devil made him do it. Later on, Jesus will argue with them and say, well, a house divided itself doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Why would this Satan thrust out demons? Yeah. They are just not willing to admit that Jesus is the Messiah. God, you know what they would have to do? Because, your actions follow what you believe. They would actually have to worship him. And they weren't going to do that in a million years. Because after all, he's a hick from Nazareth. So you see this very resistant, and this is just stupid rationalizing. This is just a crazy, but they got to explain something, because right before their very eyes they saw this happen. But I think it's interesting, this is 3 chapters before we are right now. The people looked at this and said, this guy might be the son of David, because he just healed this guy like this. There's another place too where, I'll get to you in a second, Phyllis. There's another place too where John the Baptist's disciples, John the Baptist says, go ask Jesus if he's the guy, the Messiah. And when he sends his guys to Jesus, do you remember what his response is? Well, the lame are healed. People are healed. The blind see. There's only one person in the entire Old Testament resume that can do that, and that's the Messiah. So Jesus doesn't say, I'm him. He just says, come on, open your eyes, and what do you see? What's been going on? So that's interesting. So Jesus simply didn't fit their expectations.
So their eyes were totally blind?
Yeah. And we say all the time that people believe what they want to believe, but many times you believe, when you hear new data, you believe what you already believe. So if you believe that the Messiah ought to be a certain way, you're going to filter out everything in the evidence, like healing people, and say, well, that's not really a Messiah thing. Couldn't see it. And that kind of blindness, we shouldn't get too hard on the Pharisees, because it really is a spiritual blindness. And we all come to the Lord. We come from a position of being blind. We don't see it. And what God does is he gives us enough faith that suddenly we see a different sort of way, and something clicks. That's all God-given. They're just operating still under their blindness, and kind of a prideful, reinforced blindness. So, yeah. And in fact, you see that blindness, you see that prideful blindness peel away slightly when Nicodemus comes to Jesus. And you remember when he comes in dark, because he doesn't want anyone to see him, and he comes to the presence of Jesus. And his first words to Jesus are really quite interesting. He basically says this, well, I know you're kind of like a teacher. And he's not really asking a central question here, but he's saying, I don't get who you are, but we know that you're kind of a teacher. And then Jesus sort of reads him the right act for a little bit, and then exposes in John 3 some of the most wondrous truth anywhere in the entire Bible. Nicodemus seems to have had his mind changed because of that. The scales fell off his eyes, and he started to understand, because then at the end of Jesus' life, you see Nicodemus involved in his burial. Fascinating, at great risk to himself. So anyway, it can happen, but what happens is that blindness is something that God does. And it's just miraculous. Okay, let's go on to another point here. There is purpose in God's silence. Have you ever prayed and not gotten a response? They're like, yeah, a lot. Well, what's up with that? Well, do you notice in this interchange, there was profound purpose in Jesus' silence to start with. You notice that? Very purposeful. And it got people sort of tweaked and engaged and wondering what's going on and waiting for an answer to find out what Jesus is going to say. So I'm just saying in passing, God is very capable of communicating to you. He's really much better at communicating to you than you are listening. So he can do that. So when it's silence, it's deliberate. So I want you just to consider that, because in this particular case, it was a profound element in coming to this truth about the grace of God coming to the Gentiles. It was tactical, is what I'm trying to say. So when you pray and you don't get a response, you're tempted to think, well, God's not listening, because if he heard what I was asking, since he loves me, he would respond just like that. Well, not exactly. There might be some purpose in his questioning, in his delay. And what happens with you when God is silent to your request? What do you start wondering about? Well, it's that wondering when there's a silence that great gold is built in your heart about who God is. Because you start to, you can go off the rails in the wrong direction, like I said. You can say maybe God can't hear me, which we know is impossible, but that's a good explanation from a human perspective. God doesn't hear me, or God doesn't care, right? Or God's not really, his loving kindness hasn't extended this far in my life. Maybe he's stopped loving me because I did something wrong. I mean, you go through a whole host of stupid ideas. Or you can go the opposite direction. You say, well, I haven't heard from God, but let me recall to my mind what I know about God. The Lord's loving kindness indeed never ceases. His mercies are new, every morning. So God is greatly faithful to me, despite the silence I hear right now. So what you do is you counteract the silence with ways in which God hasn't been silent in the past, and you kind of stick your faith in that revealed truth. You make sure that pillar in your bridge is solid, and you say, well, I guess all I can do is wait, because he sees and he hears and he loves. We'll see where this goes. That's the godly response. That's the godly response. There is purpose in God's silence. I'll point out one other example of that, and this is really astonishing. Remember when Mary and Martha's brother dies? Yeah, remember Lazarus dying? And Jesus is off at a distance at the time. He's down in Jericho. He's maybe a day and a half, 2 days away. And so they send messengers to Jesus saying, look, you love us and you love Lazarus, and man, he is right on the brink of death. He's going. You got to come. You got to come like right now before he dies. And then Jesus says, well, let's just stick around here a couple days. And everyone goes, what are you talking about? He's desperately ill. And sure enough, he dies. And then they get up and they go into town and they go to Mary and Martha, and it looks like the delay is deliberate. I mean, everyone can sense that. He could have been there 2 days earlier. And so then as he's coming close to the village, remember, Martha hears tell that he's coming in the village, and Martha runs out, to the edge of the village, stops Jesus on the road, and says, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. I don't know if she did this, but that's what I would have done. Probably not, no. If you'd been here, he wouldn't have died. And that might have been true. Of course, we also know that he could heal Lazarus from a distance. He could have done it from Jericho. But it seems as though, and here's the point of that's connected, it seems as though there was great purpose in his delay, as there is great purpose in his silence. And God's at work in ways that we don't totally understand. And someday he may reveal most of those to us. Sometime even in your lifespan, he might explain a couple of them. But he doesn't have to. That's not his job, is to explain himself. But what we can do is say, well, God's sovereign and he's in control. Like Jesus was in control of coming from Jericho. He could have done that, but he doesn't. There's deliberate strategy and tactic in God's silence as well as in his delays toward us. Okay, wow, we went off the rails there. So God's grace is broad. It includes the Gentiles too. And we know that because we're the beneficiaries of that. However, that was a great unknown almost throughout the entire life of Jesus. I believe that when they had their debates in early Acts about the Gentiles being in, I believe, but we don't have it documented, that someone might have said, remember when we went to Tyre and Sidon? Remember that woman up there? She was a Canaanite. And Jesus himself was playing with us when he said, wait, I'm only sent to the lost sheep of Israel, right? And then she said, yeah, but the dogs under the table. And I think they probably recounted that in those debates and said, and then Jesus healed her. So maybe the Gentiles are in. Even though Jesus is sent primarily to Israel, it doesn't mean the Gentiles are out of the picture. So that's just a growing understanding as they're talking about this there. And you see this in Paul's language, Romans 1. We're talking about the Jews and the Gentiles, right? Romans 1:16, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. It's the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, and also to the Greek, the Gentile. For in it, the righteousness of God is revealed from faith for faith, as it's written, the righteous shall live by faith. And then that's his opening salvo in Romans, and then he expands on this throughout the whole rest of the book. Faith, 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 faith. He goes back to Genesis 15. He takes us to Abraham standing under the stars, and he finally believes what God says about what's going to happen, and God reckons that to him as righteousness. And Paul explains that in Romans. And guess what, ladies? Studying Romans in January?
Yep.
Yeah. So you get to explain this line right here. So God's grace is broad. It does include the Jews, but it does include the Gentiles. But kind of it's in order. It's the Jews first and then the Gentiles. Yeah. Okay. Galatians, Paul says this quite clearly. Galatians 3:8. Listen to him. This is him expanding what he just said in Romans 1. And the scripture, foreseeing that God would justify the Gentiles by faith, yeah, preach the gospel beforehand to Abraham, saying, in you shall all the nations be blessed. By the way, Abraham, Jew or Gentile? It's a trick question. At the time he was a Gentile. Yeah, okay. Ooh, everyone, but he goes on. He goes on. I'm sorry. Yeah, Genesis 22:18. He says to Abram, in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. And so there you go, because you've obeyed my voice. So it's a moment of faith for Abraham. And what he's saying is that not just the nation that comes from you, but all the nations of the earth. And boy, aren't we fortunate, because that's us. By faith. By faith. Yeah, amen. Okay. What's another one? Oh, grace. Grace is dependent on the receiver having humility and not entitlement. That's a big, 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 big deal. Now, since we're close to Christmas and we give a lot of gifts, wouldn't it be ugly if the receiver of the gift you gave says, well, that's exactly what I deserve. Thank you for giving that to me. I think I've earned that due to my good behavior this year. I'm on Santa's nice list, not his naughty list. So I deserve this. So that kind of entitlement attitude toward a gift is just craziness. We know this from a human perspective. That's craziness. Well, grace is a gift. And so she comes to Jesus without an ounce of entitlement. You see that in her? Not an ounce of entitlement. She understands she's not entitled. But she comes in great humility and comes to his feet. And he heals her, and by grace gives to her what she asks. Grace, humility, not entitlement. Big, big deal. By the way, too, that's why we are so opposed to the false doctrines of works salvation. Because works salvation says, in very simple terms, God, if I do all these things and I achieve these things in my life, I'll get to a point where I earn what you will give to me. I'll earn this gift that you give to me. And that idea is just does not sync up with grace. Grace is a gift. You never get to the point where you say, I think I've earned it. And God says, okay, here's my grace. That's not grace. Because it's not a gift. It's what you tried to earn. And Paul makes that point as well very clearly. If you're trying to earn it, it's not grace. It's not a gift. Okay. So, if you expand this, humility and entitlement, not entitlement, you gotta consider yourself undeserving, that you cannot earn it, and that you're unworthy. Those are all prerequisites to understanding it. And she embodied that by how she dealt with Jesus. So that's just important. Do I have another one? No, I don't. We're going to sing a song. Okay. Next week will be our last one on faith. And you need to be on your toes. So you were okay today. I'll give you a B+. That was okay. But you need to be on your toes, because the person we'll see next week who embodies faith in an extraordinary degree only says 3 words. So you're going to have to do the action thing, okay? And I'm not even going to tell you who it is yet. We're going to do that together next week. She's a she. Okay, she's a she. Oh, it's a fascinating person. Okay, she's a she. Yeah. So this song so embodies the entire attitude of humility, not entitlement. Lord, I need you. It's not dependent on me. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, and they'll be filled. Lord, I can't do this on my own. Can't do this on my own. Great words. I come and I confess, bowing here, I find my rest. And without you, I fall apart. You're the one that guides my heart. Oh, such good words. And this is the woman today whose name we don't know, and that always bugs me. Because if she introduces herself in heaven to me, and she tells me her name, I go, don't know that name. She says, Tyre, Sidon, daughter, demons, dogs under the table? Well, that's the way that we won't worship and make too much of her. That's okay. But a dear lady who is very much like us when we came to Jesus. Okay, let's sing. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for your great grace toward us. We thank you that you and you alone have brought it to us, and not on the basis of what we have achieved or accomplished in trying to create our own righteousness, but you've come to us and you brought us life. Lord, I pray for so many that we know who are defensive and resistant against the truth of who you are, and in so doing, sidestep this great offer, this great gift of grace, this offer of life itself. I pray, Lord, that you would humble those who in pride keep you at arm's length. And Lord, I pray as well that in our interactions with people that we run into who are like this, that you would continue to highlight our own journey and our own lack of worthiness and our own ongoing surprise and amazement that you still respond to us like we're a Canaanite woman out in the middle of nowhere, and yet you loved us still. Lord, we are deeply grateful for these crumbs of salvation that have fallen on our plate. You are so good to us. So thank you now. In Jesus' name, amen.